You are not drifting into your future. You are rehearsing it, quietly, daily, deliberately, whether you realize it or not. Every thought you repeat, every emotion you revisit, every story you tell yourself about who you are, is practice, and practice becomes identity. Most people believe their future will be shaped by a big opportunity, a major decision, a sudden change of direction. But long before those moments arrive, the outcome has already been rehearsed, internally. James Allen wrote that a man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts, not his intentions, not his wishes, his thoughts. And here is the part most people miss. Thought is not just a momentary event. It is rehearsal. When you replay resentment, you rehearse conflict. When you replay doubt, you rehearse limitation. When you replay fear, you rehearse hesitation. You are not merely thinking, you are conditioning. Your nervous system does not know the difference between imagination and experience. So when you mentally argue with someone who isn't present, when you rehearse failure before you begin, when you revisit past humiliation again and again, you are building familiarity, and the mind moves toward what feels familiar. This is why certain outcomes repeat in your life, not because fate has chosen you, not because the world is against you, but because your internal rehearsals are shaping your external responses. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your practiced identity. And identity is formed in repetition. The quiet thought you allow daily becomes the belief you defend. The belief you defend becomes the behavior you justify. The behavior you justify becomes the life you experience. Pause for a moment. If someone followed you silently for a week, not observing your actions, but listening to your inner dialogue, what future would they predict for you? Would they hear confidence or self-doubt? Would they hear discipline or excuse? Would they hear growth or resignation? Because whatever they would hear is what you are rehearsing, and rehearsal, repeated long enough, becomes reality. This is not mystical, it is structural. Your mind is not a passive observer, it is a rehearsal space. And whether you choose it consciously or not, you are practicing something. The only question is, are you rehearsing the life you want or the life you fear? If rehearsal shapes identity, then the most important question is not what you want, it is what you practice. Because the mind does not respond to desire, it responds to repetition. You may say you want confidence, but if you repeatedly rehearse insecurity, that is what strengthens. You may say you want discipline, but if you rehearse delay, that becomes automatic. You may say you want success, but if you rehearse worst-case scenarios, you train hesitation. This is the invisible architecture beneath every life, and most people never see it. They focus on outcomes, they focus on circumstances, they focus on other people, but they never examine the rehearsal. James Allen understood this deeply. He taught that circumstances do not make the man. They reveal him, and what they reveal is what he has practiced internally. When pressure appears, you do not suddenly become someone new. You default to rehearsal. The athlete who performs under stress is not rising to the occasion. He is falling back on repetition. The speaker who stands calmly before a crowd is not magically fearless. He has rehearsed composure. The disciplined person does not wake up motivated every day. He has rehearsed action over mood. Rehearsal becomes reflex, and reflex becomes destiny. Now consider this carefully. What emotional states do you rehearse most often? Frustration, comparison, resentment, self-criticism, or gratitude? Clarity, responsibility, focus? Because emotional rehearsal is just as powerful as mental rehearsal. When you repeatedly revisit anger, you train your nervous system to respond quickly with it. When you repeatedly revisit disappointment, you train your perception to look for it. When you repeatedly revisit fear, you teach your body to prepare for threat. And the body listens. Your mind and body are not separate systems. They are partners in conditioning. The future you experience externally is deeply influenced by the internal states you normalize. If anxiety is your most practiced emotion, opportunity will feel dangerous. If inadequacy is your most practiced belief, success will feel unnatural. If chaos is your most rehearsed pattern, peace will feel unfamiliar, and the mind avoids unfamiliar territory, even if that territory is better. This is why people sabotage improvement, not because they dislike growth, but because growth feels foreign. The current identity feels safe, even if it is limiting. So they return to rehearsal, return to doubt, return to old narratives, return to emotional familiarity, and slowly, the future they once hoped to escape is rebuilt, not by fate, but by practice. If you want to change your future, you must interrupt rehearsal, not once, not emotionally, but consistently, because what you practice today is what you become tomorrow. You do not change your life by wishing for a different outcome. You change your life by changing what you mentally rehearse in private. And this is where most people misunderstand transformation. They believe change begins with a big decision, a dramatic declaration, a turning point. But real change begins quietly. It begins in the next thought, because the mind is always rehearsing something, even now. While you sit here listening, your mind is either reinforcing an old pattern or preparing a new one. There is no neutral state. You are always conditioning. So the real question becomes, if someone could observe your internal rehearsal for 1 week, what future would they predict for you? Would they see someone building strength or someone reinforcing hesitation? Would they see someone practicing responsibility or someone rehearsing blame? Would they see someone preparing for opportunity or someone preparing for disappointment? The mind does not argue with repetition. It accepts it as truth. If you repeat "I can't" often enough, it feels factual. If you repeat "I'm behind" often enough, it feels permanent. If you repeat "This is just who I am" often enough, it becomes identity. And identity governs action. This is why the invisible habit is so powerful. It works beneath awareness. It works beneath intention. It works beneath ambition. You can have enormous ambition and still rehearse limitation. You can have powerful dreams and still rehearse self-doubt. And the rehearsal will win, because rehearsal shapes reflex, and reflex overrides motivation. Motivation is emotional. Rehearsal is neurological. One fades, the other wires itself into you. So if you want to reshape your life, you must consciously rehearse the person you intend to become. Not loudly, not theatrically, but repeatedly. Rehearse calm when irritation rises. Rehearse responsibility when blame tempts you. Rehearse courage when avoidance whispers. Rehearse clarity when confusion appears. At first, it will feel unnatural, because you are interrupting years of conditioning, but that discomfort is evidence of rewiring. And here is something important. You do not need to rehearse perfection. You only need to rehearse direction. Small internal shifts, repeated daily, compound faster than dramatic external changes. The person who quietly practices composure will eventually be seen as strong. The person who quietly practices discipline will eventually be seen as reliable. The person who quietly practices gratitude will eventually experience abundance differently. Not because the world changed, but because perception did. And perception determines experience. So the invisible habit is not a mystery. It is rehearsal. And rehearsal, whether you notice it or not, is shaping the life you are walking toward. Now here is the practical turning point. If rehearsal is shaping your life, then you must become intentional about what you rehearse daily. Not once a month, not when you feel inspired, daily. Because the invisible habit operates daily. Start with awareness. Catch the automatic script. When something goes wrong, notice the first internal sentence. Is it, "This always happens to me. I knew I'd mess this up. Here we go again." Those phrases are not harmless. They are rehearsals. And every time you repeat them, you deepen the groove. Instead, interrupt it. Not with fantasy, not with forced positivity, but with direction. This is uncomfortable, but I can handle it. I'm learning something here. This moment doesn't define me. That small shift, repeated often, changes identity, and identity changes behavior. Then behavior changes results. You don't need to overhaul your personality. You don't need to reinvent yourself overnight. You need to adjust rehearsal. For example, if you want confidence, rehearse decisive small actions. If you want discipline, rehearse starting before you feel ready. If you want peace, rehearse slowing your reaction. If you want resilience, rehearse staying steady when emotion rises. Rehearsal is built in moments, in traffic, in conversations, in setbacks, in silence. Life gives you constant opportunities to practice who you are becoming. Most people miss them. They wait for a big opportunity. But big opportunities only reveal small rehearsals done consistently. And here is something powerful. The invisible habit works in your favor just as easily as against you. Once you begin rehearsing strength, strength becomes easier. Once you rehearse clarity, clarity feels natural. Once you rehearse responsibility, blame feels childish. The shift does not happen dramatically, it happens quietly. Then one day you look back and realize your reactions are different. Your posture is different. Your tone is different. Your decisions are different. And with them, your life direction. You may not control every circumstance, but you absolutely influence the internal rehearsal that meets it. And over time, that rehearsal becomes character. Character becomes destiny. So today, before the day ends, ask yourself one simple question. What kind of future am I rehearsing? Not what do I hope for? Not what do I want? What am I practicing? Because what you practice repeatedly, you become, and what you become shapes everything that follows. Before we close, let this settle in. There is nothing mystical about transformation. There is nothing reserved for the gifted. There is nothing exclusive about discipline, confidence, clarity, or strength. There is only rehearsal. And rehearsal is available to you every single day. You do not wake up one morning with a new identity. You construct it quietly. You practice it in small, ordinary moments. The invisible habit does not require applause. It does not require recognition. It does not require anyone to notice. It only requires repetition. And repetition compounds. A single thought seems small. A single reaction seems harmless. A single emotional indulgence seems insignificant. But repeated daily, they become architecture. That architecture becomes personality. And personality shapes destiny. So imagine this. If you began today rehearsing patience instead of irritation. If you began rehearsing responsibility instead of excuse. If you began rehearsing courage instead of hesitation, where would you be in 6 months? In 1 year? Not because the world changed, but because you did. Because your reflex changed. Because your internal script shifted. Because your identity evolved. The world often looks different to the person who has strengthened internally. Opportunities appear clearer. Challenges feel manageable. Pressure feels purposeful. The external may not have dramatically altered, but perception has. And perception directs behavior. And behavior directs outcome. This is the quiet power of the invisible habit. You are always becoming. Even when you think you are standing still, you are rehearsing. Even when you think you are simply reacting. So do not underestimate the private moments. Do not underestimate the silent conversations. Do not underestimate the small internal corrections no one else sees. They are shaping more than you realize. If this message resonated with you, take one idea from it, just one, and apply it today. Notice the rehearsal, interrupt what weakens you, strengthen what builds you, and remember, you may not control every circumstance you face, but you absolutely influence who you are becoming while you face it, and that changes everything.